Section 20 of the Chemistry of Cookery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Chemistry of Cookery by Mattieu Williams. Malted Food. A few years ago, the farmers' friends were very sanguine on the subject of using malt as cattle food. At agricultural meetings throughout the country, the iniquitous malt tax was eloquently denounced because it stood in the way of this great fodder reform. Then the malt tax was repealed, and forthwith the subject fell out of hearing. Why was this? The idea of malt feeding was theoretically sound. By the malting of barley or other grain, its diastase is made to act upon its insoluble starch, and to convert this more or less completely into soluble dextrin, a change which is absolutely necessary as a part of the business of digestion. Therefore, if you feed cattle on malted grain instead of raw grain, you supply them with a food so prepared that a part of the business of digestion is already done for them, and their nutrition is thereby advanced. From what I am able to learn, the reason why this hopeful theory has not been carried out is simply that it does not pay. The advantage in fattening the cattle is not sufficient to remunerate the farmers for the extra cost of the malted food. This may be the case with oxen, but it does not follow that it should be the same with human beings. Cattle feed on grass, mangold bursels, etc. in their raw state, but we cannot, and, as I have already shown, we are not graminivorous in the same manner they are. We cannot digest raw wheat, barley, oats, or maize. We cannot do this because we are not supplied with such effective natural grinding apparatus as they have in their mouths, and, further, because we have a much smaller supply of saliva and a shorter alimentary canal. We can easily supply our natural deficiencies in the matter of grinding, and do so by means of our flour mills. But at first thought, the idea of finding an artificial representative of the saliva of oxen does not recommend itself. When, however, it is understood that the chief active principle of the saliva so closely resembles the diastase of malt that it has received the name of animal diastase, and is probably the same compound, the aspect of the problem changes. Not only is this the case with the secretion from the glands surrounding the mouth, but the pancreas, which is concerned in a later stage of digestion, is a gland so similar to the salivary glands that in ordinary cookery both are dressed and served as sweetbreads. The pancreatic juice is a liquid closely resembling saliva and contains a similar diastase, or substance that converts starch into dextrin, and from dextrin to sugar. Lehmann says, "It is now indubitably established that the pancreatic juice possesses this sugar-forming power in a far higher degree than the saliva. Besides this, there is another sugar-forming secretion, the intestinal juice, which operates on the starch of the food as it passes along the intestinal canal. This being the case, we should, in exercising our privilege as cooking animals, be able to assist the digestive functions of the saliva, the pancreatic and intestinal secretions, just as we help our teeth by the flour mill, and the means of doing this is offered by the diastase of malt. In accordance with this reasoning, I have made some experiments on a variety of our common vegetable foods, by simply raising them in contact with water to the temperature most favorable to the converting action of diastase, from 140 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit, and then adding a little malt extract or malt flour. This extract may be purchased ready-made, or prepared by soaking crushed or ground malt in warm water, leaving it for an hour or two or longer, and then pressing out the liquid. I find that oatmeal porridge, when thus treated, is thinned by the conversion of the bulk of its insoluble starch into soluble dextrin, that boiled rice is similarly thinned, that stiff jelly of arrowroot is at once rendered watery, and its conversion into dextrin is demonstrated by its altered action when a solution of iodine is added to it. It no longer becomes suddenly of a deep blue color as when it was starch. Sago and tapioca are similarly changed, but not so completely as arrowroot. This is evidently because they contain a little nitrogenous matter and cellulose, which, when stirred, give a milkiness to the otherwise clear and limpid solution of dextrin. Peas pudding, when thus treated, behaves very instructively. Instead of remaining as a fairly uniform paste, it partially separates into paste and clear liquid, the paste being the cellulose and vegetable casein, the liquid a solution of the dextrin or converted starch. Mashed turnips, carrots, potatoes, etc. behave similarly, the general results showing that so far as the starch is concerned, there is no practical difficulty in obtaining a conversion of the starch into dextrin by means of a very small quantity of maltose. Hasty padding made of boiled flour is similarly altered. Generally speaking, the degree of visible alteration is proportionate to the amount of starch, but the more intimately it is mixed with the cellulose, the more slowly the change occurs. I have made malt porridge by using malt flour instead of oatmeal. I found it rather too sweet, but on mixing about 1 part of malt flour with 4 to 8 parts of oatmeal, an excellent and easily digestible porridge is obtained, and one which I strongly recommend as a most valuable food for strong people and invalids, children and adults. Further details of these experiments would be tedious and are not necessary, as they display no chemical changes that are new to science, and the practical results may be briefly stated without such details as follows. I recommend, first, the production of malt flour by grinding and sifting malted wheat, malted barley, or malted oats, or all of this, and the retailing of this at its fair value as a staple article of food. Every shopkeeper who sells flour or meal of any kind should sell this. Secondly, that this malted flour or the extract made from it as above described be mixed with the ordinary flour used in making pastry, biscuits, bread, etc., and with all kinds of porridge, pastry, pea soup, and other farinaceous preparations, and that when these are cooked, they should be slowly heated at first, in order that the maltose may act upon the starch at its most favorable temperature, from 140 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Thirdly, when practicable, such preparations as porridge, pea soup, pastry, etc. should be prepared by first cooking them in the usual manner, then stirring the malt meal or malt extract into them, and allowing the mixture to remain for some time. This time may vary from a few minutes to several hours or days, the longer the better. I have proved by experiments on boiled rice, oatmeal porridge, peas pudding, etc. that complete conversion may thus be effected. When the temperature of 140 to 150 degrees is carefully obtained, the work of conversion is done in half an hour or less. At 212 degrees, it is arrested. At temperatures below 140 degrees, it proceeds with a slowness varying with the depression of the temperature. The most rapid result is obtained by first cooking the food as above, then reducing the temperature to 150 degrees and adding the malt flour or malt extract, and maintaining the temperature for a short time. The advantage of previous cooking is due to the preliminary breaking up and hydration of the starch granules. Fourthly, besides the malt meal or malt flour, I recommend the manufacture of what I may call pearl malt, that is, malt treated as barley is treated in the manufacture of pearl barley. The pearl malt may be largely used in soups, puddings, and for other purposes evident to the practical cook. It may be found preferable to the malt flour for some of the above-named purposes, especially for making a puree, like Ramfort's soup. I strongly recommend such a soup to vegetarians. It is the Ramford soup number 1 already described, but with the admixture of a little pearl malt with the pearl barley, or malt flour failing the pearl malt. A small proportion of malt, 1/20th, for example, has a considerable effect, but a larger amount is desirable. In all cases, this quantity may be regulated by experience, and according to whether a decided malt flavor is or is not preferred. I have not yet met with any malted maize commercially prepared, but my experiments on a small scale show that it is a very desirable product. As regards the action of vegetable diastase on cellulose, whether it is capable of breaking it up or affecting its hydration and conversion into digestible sugar, I am not yet able to speak positively, but the following facts are promising. I treated sago, tapioca, and rice with the maltose as above, and found that at a temperature of 140 to 150 degrees, all the starch disappears in about half an hour as proved by the iodine test. Still the liquid was not clear. Floculi of cellulose, etc. were suspended in it. I kept this on top of a stove several days, where the temperature of the liquid varied from 100 to 180 degrees while the fire was burning, but fell to that of the atmosphere during the night. the quantity of the insoluble matter considerably diminished, but it was not entirely removed. This led me to make further experiments, still in progress, on the ensilage of human food with the aid of diastase. These experiments are on a small scale and are sufficiently satisfactory to justify more effective trials on a larger scale. It is well known that ordinary ensilage succeeds much better on a large than on a small scale, and I have no doubt that such will be the case with my diastase ensilage of oatmeal, peas pudding, mashed roots, etc. I am also treating such vegetable food material with various acids for the same purpose. When by this or other means we convert vegetable tissue into dextrin and sugar, as it is naturally converted in the ripening pear, and as it has been artificially converted in our laboratories, we shall extend our food supplies in an incalculable degree. Sweets, turnips, mango wurzels, etc. will become delicate diet for invalids. Horse beans, far more nutritious than beef, delicate biscuits and fancy pastry, as well as ordinary bread, will be produced from sawdust and wood shavings, plus a little leguminous flour to supplement the nitrogenous requirement. This may even be done now. Long ago, I converted an old pocket handkerchief and part of an old shirt into sugar, but not profitably as a commercial transaction. Other chemists have done the like in their laboratories. It is yet to be done in the kitchen. I should add that the sugar referred to in all of the above is not cane sugar, but the sugar corresponding to that in the grape and in honey. It is less sweet than cane or beet sugar, but is a better food. I have already spoken of the difficulty presented by the opposite nature of the solvents demanded by the casein and the cellulose in my experiments on the ensilage of peas pudding. The action of diastase indicates a possible solution of this difficulty. Let us suppose that a sufficient amount of potash is used to dissolve the casein, its solution separated as described in pages 218 and 219, the insoluble fibrous remainder treated with maltose or malt flour, and its action allowed to proceed to fermentation and effecting the formation of acetic acid. Will this acid, by means of ensilage, act upon the cellulose as the acid of the unripe pear acts upon its cellulose? This is another of the questions that I can only suggest, not having had time and opportunity to supply experimental answer. Do fruits contain diastase? Two kinds of food are described by Pavai, Treatise on Food and Dietetics, page 227, in the preparation of which the conversion of starch into dextrin appears to be effected. As I have no acquaintance with these, never met them either in Scotland or Wales, I will quote his description. Sowens, seeds, or flummery, which constitutes a very popular article of diet in Scotland and South Wales, is made from the husks of the grain, oats. The husks, with the starchy particles adhering to them, are separated from the other parts of the grain and steeped in water for 1 or 2 days, until the mass ferments and becomes sourish. It is then skimmed and the liquid boiled down to the consistence of gruel. In Wales, this food is called sucan. Boudrum is prepared in the same manner, except that the liquid is boiled down to a sufficient consistency to form, when cold, a firm jelly. This resembles blancmange, and constitutes a light, demulcent, and nutritious article of food, which is well suited for the weak stomach. Here it is evident that solution takes place and a gummy substance is formed. This and the fermentation and sourish taste all indicate the action of the diastase of the seed converting the starch into dextrin and sugar, the latter passing at once into acetic fermentation. Having only just met with this passage, I am unable to supply any experimental evidence, but suggest to any of my readers who may be on the spot where either of these preparations are made, the simple experiment of adding a little diluted tincture of iodine to the sowans or boudrum, preferably to the latter. If any of the starch remains as starch, a deep blue tint will immediately strike. If this is not the case, it is all converted. I have just received a letter, while the proofs of this sheet are in course of correction, from a retired barrister in his 73rd year, who, after a successful career in India, retired in 1970 to enjoy the otium cum dig. Among other interesting particulars relating to animal and vegetable diet, he tells me that, quote, "Somehow I did not, with a purely vegetable diet, excite saliva sufficient for digestion, and being constitutionally a gouty subject, I have suffered very much from gout until comparatively lately, say the last 8 months, when an idea came into my head that by the use of potash I might get rid of the calcareous deposit accompanying gout, and have been taking 30 drops of liquor potassium in my tea with very good effect. But within the last 10 days, thanks to your article in Knowledge of January 16, 1885, I have, as it were by magic, become young again. I was not aware that the diastase of malt had the same powers as the salivary secretions. When I read your article, I commenced the experiment on my morning food, namely oatmeal porridge, of which for several years I have cooked daily 4 ounces, of which I could never eat more than half without feeling distended for an hour or 2, and then again feeling hungry and a craving for more food. Since I followed your directions, I have been able to eat comfortably nearly the whole, 5 ounces with the malt. I feel no distension for the time, nor craving afterwards. I am comfortably satisfied for hours. But what is more, the diastase porridge has had the effect of removing the tendency to costiveness, which was sore trouble, and it has rendered my joints supple, and destroyed the tendency of my finger and toenails to grow rapidly and brittle. All this seems to have changed as if by magic. I, therefore, write to you as a public benefactor, to thank you for your seasonable hints. End of quote. I quote this letter, with the permission of the writer, Mr. A.T.T. Peterson, the more willingly and confidently from the fact that I have lately adopted as a regular supper diet a porridge made of oatmeal, to which about 1/6 or 1/8 of malt flour is added, and find it in every respect advantageous, far better than ordinary simple oatmeal porridge. The following from Pavai, page 229, indicates further the desirability of assisting the salivary glands and the pancreas in digesting this otherwise excellent food. Speaking of oatmeal porridge, he says, quote, "It is apt to disagree with some dyspeptics, having a tendency to produce acidity and pyrosis, and cases have been noticed among those who have been in the daily habit of consuming it, where dyspeptic symptoms have subsided upon temporarily abandoning its use." End of quote. My readers should try the following experiment. It supplies a striking demonstration of the potency of the diastase of malt. Make a portion of oatmeal porridge in the usual manner, but unusually thick, a pudding rather than a porridge. Then, while it is still hot, 150 degrees or thereabouts in the saucepan, add some dry malt flour, equal to 1/8 to 1/4 of the oatmeal used. Stir this dry flour into it, and a curious transformation will take place. The dry flour, instead of thickening the mixture, acts like the addition of water, and converts the thick pudding into a thin porridge. I find that this paradox greatly astonishes the practical cook. End of section 20.